The screens across Earth went dark for exactly 3 seconds before the emergency broadcast began. Admiral Sarah Chen stared at the massive display in the United Earth Defense Force Command Center, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the tactical table. Around her, officers and analysts worked frantically, their fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. 70,000 humans, executed. Broadcast live across every inhabited world in the Galactic Empire's territory. The message was clear. Humanity would know its place, or face extinction. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 2 millennia. Their blue-skinned, towering forms had conquered world after world, establishing themselves as the undisputed masters of known space. When humanity had first made contact with galactic civilization 30 years ago, they had been seen as just another primitive species to be absorbed into the Empire's vast bureaucracy. But humans had proven difficult to control. Unlike other species that had simply accepted their place in the galactic hierarchy, humans had continued to push boundaries. They questioned orders, modified their assigned technology, and worst of all, they inspired other subjugated species to do the same. Small rebellions had begun sprouting across Empire worlds, often led by humans or human sympathizers. The Zephyrian response had been swift and brutal. Colony ships carrying human families to their assigned agricultural worlds had been intercepted. The passengers had been separated, loaded onto transport vessels, and taken to Nexus Prime, the Empire's capital world. There, in the great amphitheater that could hold 1 million spectators, they had been forced to kneel in perfect rows, while Emperor Vextar himself had given the order. Energy weapons had fired in unison. 70,000 lives had ended in seconds. The cameras had lingered on the bodies, ensuring every species in the galaxy understood the cost of defying the Empire. Admiral Chen watched the replay for the 5th time, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. The victims had been civilians, farmers, teachers, children. Their only crime had been belonging to a species that refused to bow completely. "Ma'am," came a voice from behind her. Lieutenant Commander Reyes approached with a tablet in hand. "We're receiving communications from colony worlds throughout human space. They're demanding immediate military action." Chen nodded grimly. She had expected as much. The human colonies were scattered across dozens of systems, each one now terrified they would be next. The Empire's message had been received loud and clear, but it had not achieved the intended effect. Instead of crushing human resistance, it had ignited something far more dangerous: human rage. "What about the other species?" Chen asked. "Any reactions from our allies?" Reyes hesitated. "The Korvaxi have issued a formal statement condemning the executions, but they've made it clear they won't risk open conflict with the Empire. The Deltrans are maintaining complete silence." "The smaller species, they're scared, ma'am. The Empire just demonstrated they're willing to commit genocide to maintain order." Chen understood. Most species had learned to live under Empire rule, accepting limited freedom in exchange for security and stability. Humanity's arrival had disrupted that balance, and now they were witnessing the consequences. "Ma'am," another officer called out. "Priority transmission from Earth, Central Command. It's President Martinez." The main screen flickered, replacing the horrific images with the stern face of Earth's president. Maria Martinez looked older than her 60 years, the weight of leading humanity through its first galactic crisis having aged her rapidly. Her dark eyes held a mixture of grief and determination that Chen recognized immediately. "Admiral," Martinez began without preamble, "I've just finished emergency sessions with the Security Council and the Colonial Assembly. The decision is unanimous. We're authorizing Operation Longshot." Chen felt her heart rate spike. Operation Longshot was a contingency plan they had hoped never to implement. It was audacious, some would say impossible, and it would almost certainly lead to full-scale war with the Galactic Empire. "Ma'am, with respect," Chen said carefully, "Longshot carries enormous risks. If we fail, we die fighting." Martinez interrupted. "If we do nothing, we die on our knees. The Empire has made their position clear." "Admiral." They intend to make an example of our species. The only question now is whether we give them the fight they're asking for. Around the command center, officers had stopped their work to listen. Chen could see the mix of fear and determination on their faces. They all knew what Operation Longshot entailed. It wasn't a battle plan or a rescue mission. It was an assassination. The target? Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. Emperor Vex Tar himself, Martinez confirmed. We're going to show the galaxy that no one is untouchable, not even their god emperor. The plan was insane. Nexus Prime was the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. The Imperial Palace was surrounded by shield generators that could repel entire fleets. The Emperor rarely left his fortress, and when he did, he traveled with enough security to conquer a small planet. But humanity had one advantage the Empire had consistently underestimated: their unpredictability. The Longshot team? Chen inquired. Already being assembled, Martinez replied. We're pulling our best from every branch of service. But Admiral, this mission requires something special. Someone who can make an impossible shot under impossible circumstances. Chen understood. They needed more than just an elite soldier. They needed someone who could redefine what was possible with human precision and determination. I have someone in mind, Chen said slowly. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, Marine Force Reconnaissance. He holds the record for the longest confirmed kill shot in human military history. 3 kilometers in Earth, gravity, wind speed 40 kilometers per hour, moving target. His psychological profile? Martinez asked. Stable under extreme pressure. Lost his entire unit in the Proxima Centauri incident 6 months ago. The Empire killed his friends. Ma'am, he has the skill and the motivation. Martinez nodded. Brief him immediately. But Admiral, he needs to understand this is a one-way mission. Even if he succeeds, extraction from Nexus Prime is highly unlikely. Open. I understand, ma'am. The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with the weight of what they were about to attempt. Around her, the command center buzzed with renewed activity as officers began implementing Operation Longshot protocols. Encrypted messages were sent to deep cover agents, reconnaissance data was analyzed, and impossible logistics were made possible through human ingenuity. 3 hours later, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison stood in Chen's office, his scarred face impassive as he listened to the briefing. At 32, Morrison had already served in more combat zones than most soldiers saw in entire careers. His calm gray eyes had seen too much death, but they hadn't lost their focus. Sir, Morrison said when Chen finished explaining the mission, I understand the tactical challenges. Getting close enough to the Emperor to make the shot will require infiltrating the most secure location in the galaxy. The odds of success are 1%, Chen finished. Maybe less. We're asking you to attempt something that has never been done before, against an enemy that considers itself invincible. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the window that showed Earth's surface far below. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal conviction. Those people on Nexus Prime, sir. They died because the Empire wanted to send a message about human defiance. Every family, every child. They died because we refused to crawl. Yes, they did. Then the Empire needs to receive a message in return, Morrison said, turning back to face Chen. They need to understand that humans don't just defend ourselves. We hunt those who hurt our people. Chen studied the young Marine's face, seeing the same determination that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. Morrison understood he was being asked to sacrifice his life, but he also understood that some things were worth dying for. The mission is yours, Sergeant, Chen said formally. You'll have every resource humanity can provide. As Morrison left her office to begin preparation for the most dangerous mission in human history, Chen returned to the tactical display. The images of those 70,000 murdered civilians still burned in her mind, but alongside the grief, she felt something else: pride. The Empire had tried to break human spirit with an act of unprecedented brutality. Instead, they had awakened something they didn't understand. They had awakened the human capacity for justice, regardless of the odds. Across the galaxy, the Zephyrian Empire continued its celebrations. Emperor Vextar himself had issued proclamations about the restoration of proper order. Imperial governors on thousands of worlds had echoed his words, confident that the human problem had been solved through overwhelming force. None of them knew that in a small briefing room on Earth, a single human was studying architectural plans of the Imperial Palace, calculating wind patterns on Nexus Prime, and preparing to prove that no tyrant was beyond the reach of human justice. The Empire had forgotten a crucial lesson that every predator in Earth's history had eventually learned. Humans were not just another prey species. When pushed too far, they became the hunters, and Jake Morrison was about to remind the galaxy why. The cargo hauler times, distant hope times, drifted through the outer system of Nexus Prime like countless other merchant vessels, its hull scarred from years of interstellar trade, and its transponder identifying it as a Corvaxi freight company. To Imperial customs officials, it was just another supply ship bringing exotic foods and raw materials to the Empire's capital world. They had no idea that hidden in a specially constructed compartment behind the ship's waste recycling unit, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison lay motionless, connected to life support systems that had been disguised as standard ship components. He had been unconscious for the past week, kept in medical stasis to avoid detection by the Empire's bioscanners. The compartment was barely large enough for his body, but human engineers had managed to pack it with everything Morrison would need for his mission. His rifle had been disassembled into components that registered as common ship parts on scans. The scope appeared to be a navigation sensor, the barrel looked like a hydraulic cylinder, and the stock had been crafted to resemble a standard tool handle. Captain Elena Vasquez, a former Earth Navy officer who now ran legitimate cargo operations throughout Empire space, monitored Morrison's vital signs from the bridge while maintaining casual conversation with her mixed-species crew. None of them knew about the hidden passenger. If they were caught, she would claim ignorance and hope the Empire believed her. Approaching customs checkpoint, announced her pilot, a four-armed helix named Krev, who had joined her crew after his homeworld was annexed by the Empire. Imperial patrol ships are moving to intercept. Vasquez felt her stomach tighten, but kept her expression neutral. This was the first major hurdle. If the Empire's scanners detected Morrison or his equipment, the mission would end before it truly began. Standard protocols, she ordered. Transmit our cargo manifest and prepare for boarding. The Imperial patrol ship that pulled alongside the Times Distant Hope Times was a sleek predator compared to her battered freighter. Zephyrian technology gleamed with an efficiency that most species found intimidating. As the boarding ramp extended, Vasquez reminded herself that she was just another cargo captain trying to make an honest living. The inspection team consisted of 2 Zephyrian officers and a scanning drone that would examine every cubic meter of her ship. The lead officer, his blue skin marked with the geometric tattoos that indicated his rank, approached with the casual arrogance that all Imperial personnel displayed when dealing with lesser species. "Captain," he said in accented but precise English, "your manifest indicates food supplies from the Outer Rim territories. We will need to examine samples." "Of course," Vasquez replied, leading them toward the cargo bay, where crates of actual foodstuffs waited. The inspection was thorough, but routine. The officers seemed more interested in checking for smuggled weapons or illegal technology than conducting a detailed search for stowaways. The scanning drone passed within meters of Morrison's hiding place, its sensors detecting nothing more than standard ship components and waste recycling equipment. The specialized shielding that surrounded his compartment, developed from captured Empire technology and human innovation, successfully masked his life signs. After an hour that felt like an eternity, the inspection team departed with casual dismissals and warnings about properly documenting exotic imports. Vasquez waited until they were well out of range before allowing herself to breathe normally again. "Phase 1 complete," she whispered into a hidden communicator. Somewhere in deep space, Admiral Chen would receive confirmation that Morrison had successfully penetrated Nexus Prime's outer defenses. The Times, Distant Hope Times, continued toward the planet's surface, joining a stream of commercial traffic that never ceased flowing into the Empire's heart. Nexus Prime itself was a monument to Zephyrian power. its surface covered with cities that stretched to the horizon and beyond. The Imperial Palace sat at the planet's north pole, a massive structure that could be seen from orbit. Morrison began to wake as the ship entered the planet's atmosphere, his body slowly recovering from the extended stasis. Through the neural link connecting him to the ship's external sensors, he studied his target for the first time with his own eyes. The Imperial Palace was larger than any single building humanity had ever constructed. Its spires reached into the clouds, and its base covered an area that could have housed the entire population of a small colony. Shield generators created a shimmering dome around the entire complex, and Morrison could see the movement of patrol ships maintaining constant watch. But Morrison wasn't looking at the obvious defenses. His trained eye was cataloging sight lines, elevation angles, and the single critical factor that would make his mission possible: distance. The palace had been built as a symbol of Zephyrian supremacy, designed to be seen and admired from great distances. This meant there were clear lines of sight from various points around the city, some extending for kilometers. To the Empire's architects, this had been an expression of confidence. To a human sniper, it was an opportunity. The landing process took hours as the distant Hope Times waited in traffic queues with thousands of other vessels. Morrison used the time to study detailed intelligence reports that had been hidden in his equipment. Human agents across the galaxy had risked their lives to gather information about the Emperor's routines, the palace security protocols, and the city's layout. Emperor Vex-Tar followed a rigid schedule that reflected his belief in Zephyrian superiority over chaos and unpredictability. Every morning at precisely 0800 local time, he appeared on the palace's highest balcony to address gathered dignitaries and officials. The ceremony lasted exactly 15 minutes, and represented the Empire's daily renewal of its divine mandate to rule. The balcony was protected by energy shields, but Morrison had studied the specifications. The shields were designed to stop projectiles moving at typical weapon velocities. However, human ballistics had advanced beyond Empire understanding. A round fired from Morrison's specially modified rifle, accelerated by experimental propulsion systems, would be moving fast enough to punch through the shields before they could adapt. The math was simple, even if the execution would be anything but. Once the distant Hope Times landed at a commercial spaceport 40 kilometers from the palace, Morrison had to get himself and his equipment into position. This meant traveling through a city where security was omnipresent and any unusual activity would be immediately investigated. Vasquez had arranged for a local contact, a human named David Park, who worked as a maintenance supervisor for one of the city's massive residential towers. Park had been carefully selected. His building was exactly 4.7 kilometers from the palace, at the perfect angle and elevation for Morrison's shot. The equipment transfer happened in the service tunnels beneath the spaceport. Morrison, now dressed as a standard maintenance worker, met Park in a utility chamber filled with power conduits and water recycling equipment. Neither man spoke as they quickly transferred the rifle components from shipping containers to a standard tool bag. Floor 127, Park said quietly. Maintenance access point 7 Alpha. The room will be empty between 0745 and 0815 tomorrow morning. Regular maintenance workers will be elsewhere in the building. Morrison nodded. Tomorrow morning was when Emperor Vex-Tar would make his daily appearance. Morrison would have a 15-minute window to set up his shot, fire, and attempt to escape. The timing had to be perfect. The journey to Park's building required taking public transportation through a city that never slept. Morrison sat quietly among workers from dozens of different species, all going about their daily lives under Imperial rule. Many were humans who had been relocated to Nexus Prime for various work assignments. They had no idea that one of their own was about to attempt something that would change the course of galactic history. As the transport moved through the city, Morrison observed the security measures that surrounded the palace district. Patrol drones moved in preset patterns through the air, while ground-based security forces maintained checkpoints at regular intervals. The Empire's confidence in its own invincibility was evident in the relatively relaxed nature of the security. They were watching for organized military threats, not a single individual with a rifle. Morrison spent the night in a small apartment that Park had arranged, going through his final preparations. He assembled his rifle with practiced precision, each component fitting together to create a weapon that represented the pinnacle of human engineering. The rifle itself was a work of art, crafted specifically for this mission by the finest weapons specialists Earth could provide. The scope had been calibrated for Nexus Prime's atmospheric conditions and gravity, which was 1.2 times Earth normal. The ammunition was a single custom round that had cost more to manufacture than most people earned in a lifetime. Everything had been designed for this moment, this shot that would determine whether humanity would bow to imperial tyranny or stand and fight. As dawn approached, Morrison made his way to the maintenance level of Park's building. The utility room was exactly as described, a small chamber filled with environmental controls for the building's upper floors. More importantly, it had a single window that faced directly toward the Imperial Palace. Morrison set up his rifle with methodical precision, checking and rechecking every calculation. Wind speed on Nexus Prime was affected by the planet's unique atmospheric composition, requiring adjustments that no human had ever attempted at this distance. The target would be protected by energy shields, personal armor, and distance that would challenge the limits of human marksmanship. At 0750, Morrison was ready. His rifle was positioned, his calculations were complete, and his breathing had settled into the controlled rhythm that marked a sniper at work. Through his scope, he could see the palace balcony where Emperor Vextar would appear in 10 minutes. Around the galaxy, the Zephyrian Empire continued its normal operations. Imperial governors issued daily reports, military commanders planned new conquests, and bureaucrats administered the vast machinery of galactic dominance. None of them knew that in a maintenance room on Nexus Prime, a human was taking aim at the heart of their civilization. Morrison checked his chronometer, 0755. In 5 minutes, he would fire a single shot that would either kill the Emperor of the Galaxy or guarantee his own death. The weight of humanity's future rested on his ability to make an impossible shot under impossible circumstances. As he settled into his final shooting position, Morrison thought briefly of the 70,000 civilians who had died to send a message about imperial power. In a few minutes, he would send a message in return. The Empire had declared that humans would know their place in the galactic order. Morrison was about to show them exactly where humanity stood. At precisely 0800 hours, the massive doors to the Imperial Palace balcony began to open. Morrison's finger rested lightly on the trigger of his rifle, his breathing controlled and steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. Through his scope, he watched as Zephyrian guards took their positions, their ceremonial armor gleaming in the morning light of Nexus Prime's twin suns. The distance was 4.7 kilometers. The wind was gusting at 15 kilometers per hour from the northwest. The energy shields surrounding the balcony shimmered like heat waves, their defensive matrices cycling through protective frequencies. Every variable had been calculated, every factor accounted for. Now it came down to one moment, one shot, one chance to change the course of galactic history. Emperor Vextar emerged from the palace interior with the measured dignity that befitted the ruler of 1,000 worlds. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, his blue skin was marked with the sacred tattoos that proclaimed his divine right to rule. His ceremonial robes flowed behind him as he approached the balcony's edge, where a lectern waited for his daily address to the assembled dignitaries below. Morrison tracked the Emperor's movement through his scope, noting the ruler's predictable pace and positioning. Vextar always stood in exactly the same spot for these ceremonies, his arrogance ensuring that he made himself a perfect target. The Emperor had never considered that anyone would dare attempt an assassination from such an impossible distance. The scope's crosshairs settled on a point just ahead of where Vextar would stop, accounting for the bullet's flight time and the target's movement. Morrison's heart rate dropped to the controlled rhythm he had trained for his entire career. This was the moment that separated elite snipers from everyone else. The ability to make an impossible shot when everything depended on it. Vextar reached the lectern and raised his arms to address the crowd. His voice, amplified by speakers throughout the palace district, began the daily recitation that reinforced imperial authority. He spoke of order, of the Empire's divine mission, and of the recent example that had been made of rebellious humans. Morrison exhaled slowly, his finger tightening on the trigger. The Emperor was motionless now, presenting a stationary target for the first time since emerging onto the balcony. This was the moment. The rifle fired with a sound like thunder, its specially designed propulsion system launching the custom round at velocities that pushed the limits of materials science. The bullet, crafted from experimental alloys and guided by microscopic adjustments, streaked across the cityscape at nearly 3 kilometers per second. The energy shields detected the incoming projectile and began to cycle their defensive frequencies. But human engineering had anticipated this response. The bullet's composition shifted as it flew, its molecular structure adapting to match the shield harmonics that Imperial technology used. When the round struck the energy barrier, it passed through as if the shield didn't exist. Emperor Vextar was still speaking when the bullet found its target. The impact was instantaneous and final. The ruler of the galaxy, the being who had commanded the deaths of 70,000 innocent humans, crumpled to the balcony floor without finishing his sentence. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, silence filled the palace district. The gathered dignitaries stared in shock at their fallen emperor, unable to process what had just occurred. Then chaos erupted. Imperial guards rushed to Vextar's body while others scanned the surrounding cityscape, searching for threats that their technology insisted couldn't exist. Alarm sirens wailed across the palace complex as emergency protocols activated. Medical teams raced toward the balcony, though their efforts were futile. The Emperor was dead before he hit the ground. Morrison was already moving. He disassembled his rifle with practiced speed, distributing the components among several different bags that would appear to contain standard maintenance equipment. Within 3 minutes of taking the shot, he was walking calmly through the building's corridors, looking like any other worker going about his daily duties. The building's security systems had detected the sound of the rifle firing, but their sensors couldn't pinpoint the source with enough precision to identify Morrison's exact location. As Imperial forces began searching the area, Morrison was already several floors away, using maintenance passages that Park had mapped out for him. The city's transportation network went into immediate lockdown as Imperial security forces tried to contain any possible escape routes. However, Morrison wasn't trying to flee. His mission had a second phase that was just as important as the assassination itself, making sure the galaxy knew who was responsible. He made his way to a predetermined location in the city's commercial district, where a human merchant named Sarah Kim was waiting with a quantum transmitter hidden in her shop's back room. Kim had been risking her life for months to maintain this secret communication link with Earth, knowing that it might one day be needed for exactly this purpose. "It's done," Morrison said simply as he activated the transmitter. The message was immediately relayed through a network of hidden human agents, bypassing Imperial communication systems entirely. Within hours, every human colony in the galaxy would know that Emperor Vextar was dead, killed by human precision from an impossible distance. But Morrison wasn't finished. The galaxy needed to understand that this wasn't just an act of revenge, it was a demonstration of human capability. He activated the transmitter's broadcast function, sending a message on all Imperial frequencies. "This is Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force." His voice carried across the communication networks of Nexus Prime. "Emperor Vextar has been executed in response to the murder of 70,000 human civilians. The Galactic Empire chose to rule through terror. Humanity chooses to respond with precision." The message continued. "To every species living under Imperial oppression, you are not alone. To every Imperial official who participated in genocide, you are not untouchable. To every human in the galaxy, remember who we are." Imperial forces were closing in on Morrison's location, their search patterns finally narrowing down his position. He had perhaps 10 minutes before they found him. But his mission was complete. The shot had been made, the message had been sent, and the galaxy would never be the same. Morrison thought of the 70,000 civilians who had died simply for being human. Their deaths had been meant to break humanity's spirit, to teach them their place in the Imperial order. Instead, those deaths had awakened something the Empire couldn't understand: the human refusal to accept injustice, regardless of the odds. When Imperial forces finally breached Sarah Kim's shop, they found Morrison waiting calmly, his hands visible and empty. He had no intention of resisting arrest. His work was done. The sniper who had changed galactic history allowed himself to be captured without firing another shot. News of Emperor Vextar's assassination spread across the galaxy faster than Imperial authorities could contain it. On 1,000 worlds, subjugated species watched in amazement as the being they had considered untouchable was revealed to be mortal. The Empire's carefully maintained image of invincibility cracked in an instant. Human colonies throughout the galaxy erupted in celebration. But more importantly, they began to organize. If one human with a rifle could kill the Emperor himself, what could united humanity accomplish? Colonial militias that had been operating in secret began to emerge into the open. Human workers in Imperial facilities started coordinating their efforts. The scattered children of Earth began to remember that they were part of something larger than themselves. The Empire's response was swift and brutal. Imperial fleets moved toward human colonies, preparing to complete the genocide that had begun with the executions on Nexus Prime. But they found something they hadn't expected. Resistance. Human colonists had spent the weeks since the massacre preparing for exactly this response. Hidden weapons caches were revealed, defensive positions were manned, and improvised spacecraft were armed with whatever weapons human ingenuity could create. More importantly, other species began to join them. The Korvaxi, who had remained neutral for centuries, suddenly discovered convoys of stolen weapons heading toward human colonies. The Deltrans, despite their official silence, found that their merchant ships were experiencing unusual navigational errors that resulted in critical supplies reaching human resistance groups. Even species that had never openly opposed the Empire began to find ways to quietly support the rebellion. Admiral Chen watched these developments from Earth's command center, where reports flooded in from across human space. The assassination had triggered exactly the response they had hoped for. The galaxy was remembering that tyranny could be opposed. Morrison's sacrifice worked, reported Lieutenant Commander Reyes. Imperial forces are meeting organized resistance on 17 different worlds. More colonies are declaring independence every hour. Chen nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed human forces preparing for the war that would determine their species' survival. Morrison's single shot had accomplished something that fleets and armies couldn't. It had shown the galaxy that the Empire could bleed. On Nexus Prime, Morrison was taken to the deepest levels of the Imperial security complex, where interrogators tried to understand how a single human had penetrated their defenses. He answered their questions with the same calm precision he had shown when taking his shot, explaining the mathematics of ballistics and the engineering that had made the impossible possible. "Your Empire made a mistake," he told his captors during one interrogation session. "You thought you could teach humanity its place through fear. But humans don't learn lessons the way other species do. We learn by figuring out how to solve problems, and you've become a problem that needs solving." The Zephyrian interrogator, his blue skin flushed with anger, demanded to know about human military capabilities and defensive plans. Morrison smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "You want to know about human capabilities?" Morrison asked. "You just saw them. One human, one rifle, one shot. That's what we're capable of when you threaten our families." The Empire executed Morrison 3 days later, broadcasting his death across the galaxy just as they had broadcast the massacre that had started this conflict. But the Empire had learned nothing from their previous mistake. Instead of crushing human resistance, Morrison's execution became a rallying cry that unified every human in the galaxy. The war that followed would last for years, consuming resources and lives on a scale that the galaxy had never seen. But it had begun with a single shot fired by a human who refused to accept that any tyrant was beyond justice. Morrison's bullet had killed more than an emperor, it had killed the myth of imperial invincibility. In the end, the Galactic Empire would fall not to superior technology or overwhelming force, but to something they had never encountered before. A species that responded to oppression with calculated, precise, and utterly human defiance. The 70,000 civilians who had died on Nexus Prime were finally avenged, and their sacrifice had awakened something that would reshape the galaxy. Humanity had learned its place in the galactic order. Just as the Empire had intended, they had learned that they belonged wherever they chose to stand.